Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is Intermodal Expo 2025, Unpacking Cargo Theft, AI, and Mergers and Acquisition with my friend Anne Reinke. How's it going, Anne?
Great, Joe. Thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
I always enjoy talking to you, and I'm going to enjoy seeing you soon in Long Beach.
You're one of our special podcasters.
Yes. So, Anne, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
Sure. So I am president and CEO of the Intermodal Association of North America. And I know you have a very sophisticated audience, so hopefully I'm not speaking down to anybody. But for those who don't know what intermodal is basically the transfer of containers from one mode of transportation to the next. So if you're talking about domestic intermodal, it's from truck to train. And if you're talking about international intermodal, it's from ocean carrier to truck to train or to train to truck, etc. And so how all those folks get along is our responsibility. We have about 1,000 members from Class 1 railroads to ocean carriers to dray operators, chassis suppliers, and other vendors, port terminals, etc. Anyone who's engaged in the intermodal space. Today, I am at our HQ, which is in Calverton, Maryland, a little bit 45 minutes outside of DC.
Nice. So IANA, IANA, Intermodal Association North America. I had never heard of it until I was at the cybersecurity conference last year, and I met some of your guys. I had met Piyush from there. And when he told me, by the way, you had just joined then, and I was like, oh, makes sense. But it's an organization that's been around for a while, but kind of flew under the radar. I mean, you come from a very high profile. You came from TIA. I think a lot of people recognize your name from there. And I think IANA needs to get a little more sunshine on it, because I think it's so important. And we learned during COVID that if we had some weak areas of visibility, some weak areas where the handoffs didn't happen as easily, and again, because it's not as easy, it was the ports and getting it from the ship to the port to the truck to the train is not easy. That was an area that we really stumbled with. And I think it's always probably one of the hardest parts of the supply chain, because we're also talking about clearing customs, and it's a very difficult area. So who are members of IANA and who should consider being part of IANA?
Well, so you're exactly right, Joe. It's a 34-year-old organization. And my predecessor did a phenomenal job of being what it is, creating what it is, which is this representative voice, really the sole representative voice for the intermodal industry. They hired me, though, because they wanted, to your point, to make it far more public-facing pitch about how important intermodal is. We had an opportunity, I think, to your point of the supply chain crisis, IANA did, to really make a name for itself. At the time, the thinking was they just did it. And I wasn't there, so I don't know. But I think there is an incredible opportunity now to talk about the value of intermodal. So our members we have 5 different divisions. We have the Marine Division, which includes ports and ocean carriers. We have the railroads, which includes the Class 1 railroads like BNSF and UP, to the short line carriers like Florida East Coast. We have a 3PL division. So my old colleagues at TIA, some of which are sort of both memberships, they have both memberships. And they're the ones who really have railroads as their customer and arranging transportation for the beneficial cargo owner using railroads. And we have a vendor/supplier division. So those folks who make containers, who are chassis providers, et cetera. And then we have, your education folks and your BCOs who are also members.
Nice. So there's a wide range. And by the way, there should be a wide range. And I think before we hit the record button, I said this to you, and I feel like this is very true of our business. The big shippers of the world, whether it's Procter & Gamble or Ford or whoever, they want flow. And then when they get to the logistics providers, we tend to be point solutions with kind of, you know, an inch wide and a mile deep. We really, really, truly understand over the road because that's what we do, or we understand warehousing, but we don't understand as much about what goes on upstream or downstream of us. And that is a real problem because that's where the days and the sometimes weeks are lost in our supply chain. And I think the bar just gets higher and higher. So we have to have a better understanding of what goes on. You might say, well, I'm a trucking company. What do I care what happens at the port? Obviously, you're picking up at the port or near the port. So we have to kind of get that flow mindset.
I 100% agree. And the point of intermodal is to be a partner, but also to have leverage the highest best use of each mode. So obviously, an ocean carrier is going vast distances and has an enormous volume, right? They have these thousands and thousands of TEUs. So you need an ocean carrier to do that. With a dray provider, they're doing the sort of the short haul, right? They're going from a warehouse to the port, or a warehouse or the port to the railroad. And then the railroad's going a much longer distance. And so we are all partnered together, but this is the highest best use of the mode. And you're exactly right. The way that we partner together has to be one of knowledge and understanding and appreciation so that there is this kind of seamlessness about it. We want to sell it as a service product. And in order to sell it as a service product, we have to assure its sort of ease of use.
Yep. So I'll make sure we put a link to your LinkedIn profile, link to your website, and links so anyone listening can join IANA. But just as important for today is you have a conference coming up, and it starts 2 weeks from today. We're talking on, is it 2 weeks from today, or is it 2 weeks from?
2 weeks from yesterday.
Yesterday,
oh
yeah,
my
Sunday.
Gosh.
Or Monday, that's a Monday, because we're talking on a Tuesday, the day after Labor Day. So 13 days from now, your conference is in Long Beach. Tell us about that conference. It's not too late to get there.
No, it is not too late to get there. Yes, you can still register. You can register either at...
We'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, expo2025.com or at intermodal.org. However, so why do you want to go there? Well, how I explain it is it's either intermodal Christmas or speed dating for intermodal. And both, I think, definitions hold true. The whole community, the universe of intermodal comes out there. And why do they do it? Well, anyone else that they need to talk to who's in the intermodal space is also there. And so they may want to leverage their customer, relationships to have, we have to have this opportunity to sit down and talk through what's happening for next year, what's our outlook for service, what's our outlook for products, et cetera. But so that's through your speed dating, right? They have these little opportunities to chat with each other, but it's also Christmas because it's also everybody's coming out and they're going with the express idea of they want to see the people they work with. They want to see the people that they know, and they want to talk about what's the issues that are confronting them. And there is a commonality of interest, obviously. So we have 1,200 people who come out and they want to talk about the things that they have been plaguing them. And, we'll get into some of those issues in a second, but really we're providing that forum.
Yep. Super important. And I think, and I don't think it's particularly a political thing. I think it's going to happen regardless of whether there's Democrats in office or Republicans in office. We're going to see repositioning of supply chains. And I think we're also going to see some repositioning of vendors. So Sal Mercogliano, who I mentioned to you before we hit record, I'll make sure I introduce you to Sal. He's got the podcast or the YouTube channel, What's Going On in Shipping. And he was making the point that shipping containers aren't made here. Ships aren't made here. All that stuff. So going forward, I think there's going to be more emphasis on who makes those containers, who makes the ships. And I think there's going to be, anytime there's a repositioning, there's opportunity for people to maybe gain some business, gain some expertise. I think the opportunities are going to be huge going forward.
I agree with you. And, I don't want to get us too far afield, but so for example, the domestic intermodal containers, none of them are built in the United States, to your point. But because the marketplace has been so capacious, if that's a kind of gentle way of saying it, there's been so much capacity. We as an industry have not sort of waved our hands to say this is a bad idea to impose a huge tariff on any new intermodal containers just because there are so many that aren't being used.
Right, right. And some of those things, like building a shipping container, isn't an impossibly hard task for us. But I do think that we should start looking and saying what we're going to end up building here isn't going to be yesterday's container. It's going to be the future of containers. And my sense is going to have, it's not, no offense, containers, but I think we look at containers today as kind of dumb. I think going forward, they're going to be very smart containers that are going to make it really easy for us to prevent cargo theft, which we'll get into, and be easy to track and trace and make sure we're not doing anything wrong with these containers, because there's a lot of bad things happen with containers sometimes.
Yeah, no, you're right. And there are some companies that are exploring smart containers. It's not ubiquitous yet, but to your point, I think it will over time because there will be an expectation of knowing at all times where your commodities are in light of cargo theft, but also because of customer demands and a desire to have that information.
Yep. I should also mention, I know there's going to be a lot of new tech out at your conference. I saw the Bloodhound guys are going to be at your conference. I've talked to them on the podcast. Those are basically sensors inside of a container that can tell you whether there's fentanyl in there. I don't know if they've released that yet, but they're close. So they can tell you if there's fentanyl in that container. They can tell you if people are in that container or explosives. I think that's what I mean when I say the new tech that we're going to see in our containers. And it's about time. I mean, and I think this is where, we can put that U.S. innovation to work.
Yeah, and maybe it's not the actual manufacturer of the container or the owner of the container. Maybe it's a third-party vendor, to your point, who provides that technology. But it exists. There are some, there's a company that we know that has sensors on the container doors. And so when those container doors open when they shouldn't, they can send out a signal basically to whomever has that container.
I think even if you breach the side, I think Bloodhound can tell you. So if somebody says, I know if I break the doors open that there's a camera on me. Now I think, if you take a can opener to the side of it, they're going to say, we caught you there too. But anyway, we'll get into all that. So I'll make sure I put a link to the IANA conference, and anybody and everybody should get out there. It again starts on September 15th through the 17th out at Long Beach. And what's the hotel that it's at?
Well, we have a couple of different hotels. There's a Hyatt, there's a Hilton, there's a Fairmont, there's a Courtyard by Marriott. So if you go to our webpage, there should still be some rooms available under our block.
And then where is the conference itself?
It's in the convention center at Long Beach.
Oh, nice. I didn't know they had a convention.
I know, yeah. They do a great job. They're a great partner, the Long Beach community.
Excellent, excellent. So, Anne, tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you joined the juggernaut that is IANA.
I am from Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. native. And so what does that mean about me? That I was actually happy last year for the first time in 30 years because of a new coach, new owner, new quarterback. We have to see what's going to happen this season, right, Joe? I know you're a Detroit Lions fan, and it was a crushing defeat to watch the Lions.
We did not expect to lose.
I know you didn't expect to lose. I don't think we expected to win, to tell you the truth. That was a phenomenal game. I felt bad for Jared Goff because I think he's a terrific guy.
I like it. I think he's so well liked. I think that he felt like he was being thrown away when he came to the Lions. But
I know, but he made it really stand out and become a huge program. Him and the coach, obviously.
Yeah, and by the way, anywhere you go, so if you there's a concert in Detroit. There's always concerts. If the Pistons are playing, if the Red Wings are playing, there's always a chant in all of those arenas, and it's Jared Goff, Jared Goff, and you'd be like, and I always think, is that band up there going, why is the crowd chanting Jared Goff here?
Well, because he really leaned in to being a leader, and it showed. The team really turned around. It was incredible. But anyway, but I am a lawyer. I never really practiced for any length of time. I think for like a year. And I felt like I was doing the work of a trained monkey. It was document review, which if you're a lawyer, document review is what you start at, like your baseline legal work. And so I got into lobbying And I worked at the Association of American Railroads, and then I went to CSX for 16 years. I represented them in DC. And so a lot of the worst issues like derailments that happen at 4 o'clock in the morning, because they all happen at 4 o'clock in the morning, we've got to communicate that to whomever is affected. And then the best stuff too, right? So what railroads can do to help the community, can help the serve customers, et cetera. I went to USDOT after 16 years. I was there for about 18 months, and that was an incredible learning experience about other things just besides railroads. And then the last 4 years, I was at the Transportation Intermediaries Association, the 3PL folk, and those folk are just the best, like the most entrepreneurial kind of go-getters, but without being arrogant, and they're incredibly unassuming. So it was just a terrific, terrific experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting. TIA and the companies that are part of TIA are kind of front and center. I'm not saying you recognize every last player there, but they're big companies that seem to have name recognition everywhere. When you talk about intermodal, the class one railroads, the short lines, they don't go to all the conferences. We don't have a sense for who they are. They provide an incredible service, but it's limited. So not everybody, and I don't think they're sales forward. None of those organizations feel like, I suspect they reach out to the customers who's a good fit for them, and that's it. Where the trucking business feels like, or in the freight brokerage business and the warehousing, they'll sell 24/7 to anyone who will listen. And by the way, that's why they're successful. Rail and intermodal just feels like it truly is the foundation of our economy. I mean, there's no way around it. We would not have the world we have without it, and we would not have global trade the way we have it today without it. And yet it flies a little under the radar.
Yeah, I think maybe, and this is a psycho-babble hypothesis, but being 250 years old, which the railroads are, and many of the ocean carriers are pretty old too, they don't necessarily have as much to prove. Like, you already know who we are, so that's it. I will say this, though, that the current railroad CEOs really do seem much more focused on growth of the customer base, growth in particular of intermodal, and being far more public facing. Again, I think that's probably why the board of IANA wanted to have someone who really stressed those issues of getting in front of, for example, we're starting an advocacy department. We never had one. We never had a vice president of government affairs. And so that person is starting at Expo. So Joe, you'll get to meet that person. And we are also going to do a PR campaign to talk about why intermodal is essential and why it is something that a beneficial cargo owner should consider. And we hired a economic manager, a director of economics, to really synthesize the data and to make sure, like, there are probably more things that we could collect that would be helpful to the membership. And then we can be the, here's the quote, source of truth as for, all things intermodal and, showcasing the trends and what that all means. I kind of want us to be all out there.
Yep. Well, I think there's huge opportunities for the whole industry. We touched on the conference, but what is the overall mission of IANA?
The overall mission of IANA is to, in my view, grow market share for intermodal, but also to sort of protect, defend, promote the intermodal industry. And we do that through education. We do that through networking. We do that through this data, that we have. We do that through a number of different functions. And what's cool about it is my predecessor did such a great job at making the association strong. I sort of have the luxury of benefiting of how we can expand our utility.
Yep. And we should also mention that you guys are our lobbyists. You're the ones who are in Washington, D.C., visiting our congressmen and our senators to let them know what we need from them.
That's right.
We need that. So one of the things that we need help from them on is cargo theft. So please,
Yeah.
last time we talked it was only a couple months ago, I think. But you said, I think last time we spoke, that you guys were pushing Congress to do more about cargo theft. Tell us what's going on, other than we have plenty of cargo theft.
Yeah, unfortunately, we still have plenty of cargo theft. But we do have two pieces of legislation now that are working themselves through the system. One of which is takes a look at how to make enforcement stronger for those who steal. So pursuing it as a federal crime in some cases, which is enormously helpful, right? So if you steal from a railroad, or if you steal a certain amount over a period of months, you can pursue it as a federal crime. So that's great. That legislation is called Combating Organized Retail Crime, Organized Retail Cargo and Crime. Yes, cargo theft and crime. It would also create a collaboration center at the Department of Homeland Security, so that there could be a public-private sharing of information, because right now we're all sort of siloed off and walled off, and we don't have the best information, the most actionable information, and that would be enormously helpful. It won't solve anything, but it will certainly provide insights into what the feds are seeing and what we're seeing, and how we can actually try to target those criminals that we see in the system. So there's what's nice about it is the retail folk and the transportation folk have partnered to push this legislation. So they're not just focused on retail theft, we're also focused on cargo theft.
Yeah, it reminds me, I'm an automotive guy originally, and for a long time, if you watch an old movie, you'll see people just take a Slim Jim and just get into a car, and then it seems like every guy from the 60s knew how to hotwire a car. And you can't do that anymore. And their Slim Jims don't work, so you don't ever see that anymore. But also, you can't easily hotwire a car. I'm sure there's a new modern way to steal cars, but it's not easy. And what we saw change after we got really sophisticated about you can't steal a parked car is carjacking. Because you driving in your car with a weak link, somebody walks up, puts a gun to the side window, and you're like, good, take it, I'm out. And I think the same thing happens with this theft. We've seen I think everybody who watches videos online sees people walk into stores and walk back out of stores, and the people who work at the stores are told, don't do anything about it. I don't think that's going to last for much longer. I think these kind of, I live in a nice area. It happened in my Home Depot not so long ago. Over with the barber shop was saying, I just watched the guy just walk out with a chainsaw, and everyone's told, don't do anything. But I've heard, I interviewed Danielle Spinelli from My Carrier Portal, which is now part of Descartes, and she was saying the cartels are involved in cargo theft. The drug gangs that are from that operate in the Mexico-Texas border are now involved in this theft. So it's not just onesie twosie stuff. It's sophisticated, and they're robbing trains. I saw the video where they got a pickup truck running alongside a train, and people are throwing stuff out of the cars of the train into the bed of the truck.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so that's the point we've tried to make, which is this isn't just a B2B issue. This isn't just, we lost money on this load, which they don't care about because they don't have enough resources and they're focused on crimes against humans. We get it, right? But what our point is that this is part of a larger criminal enterprise. Typically, there's two types of theft that we see. There's the crimes of opportunity, which is those folks who are like, oh, I see a train that has an Amazon, labeling to it, I'm going to see what's inside, to those who are deliberately organized. They know that what's in that container is Nike Air Jordans, and they know exactly when it's going to stop, and so then they go after it, right? And why do they do that? Because they're using that to steal, to pay for whatever else it is, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's drugs, what have you. And so when there's one really big crime, it also portends that it's linked to other really big crimes. And what's been unfortunate is just that because of stretched resources in some cases, because some during the pandemic were not looking to enforce crime, retail crime or anything like that. To your point, they just didn't do it. That there's been sort of a lack of interest in pursuing it. But as you said, that is changing.
Yeah, I'd love to see the punishment for this stuff go up. But I do think the solution is going to be from the private sector. I think we're going to see, I mentioned the Bloodhound. I think it's Bloodhound Tracking. They'll be at your conference. I've interviewed them before. And again, they have all sorts of sensors and cameras. And I can see us getting to a place where the combination of our seals and our locks and our visibility is going to be such that we're going to be able to stop a lot of this. But there still has to be some ramifications, consequences for if you're caught doing this. Because I think Danielle Spinelli showed me pictures. She did a webinar with California Highway Patrol, the CHIPs, and she said we have warehouses that are filled with stolen goods, and those guys don't get big long criminal sentences. Every time some friend of mine says, "Oh, I bought it on Facebook Marketplace and it's brand new," I always think, I wonder if that was stolen.
Yeah, where did that come from? I'm with you. And in fact, we're going to have someone from California Highway Patrol at our conference to talk about that, because California is, as we've all talked about till we're blue in the face, is the most
50%.
Yes, it's 50% of the cargo theft. So probably 50% of the retail theft as well. And to that end, too, we have a speaker. Our main keynote speaker is Anne Milgram, who was the administrator of the DEA under the last administration. She's going to be talking about the cartels and the implications here for cargo theft. And so that will be tremendous, I think, a tremendous education for those folks who are not aware. Obviously a lot in the intermodal space are, but it will be helpful to get that message out.
Yep. When I interviewed you a few times ago, you were at TIA and we were talked about freight fraud. And I always think cargo theft is obviously way worse than freight fraud, but they're first cousins.
First cousins. You're exactly right. There's less fraud, I think, in the intermodal space for a couple of different reasons. I think just because it's probably fewer players than there are in the carrier broker space. But that being said, fraud or theft, neither one you're seeking out.
Yep. And I think also another cousin to this is cybersecurity, which I think is the most serious of all of these things. And cybersecurity is one of those things that can take down a company. And, I think what we've seen with the cybersecurity is it could be hackers who are looking for money. So their financial interests. Sometimes it's going to be hackers from a country like North Korea or China, some other. And then I know there's also these hacktivists who are hacking in and saying, don't haul oil or something along those lines. So there's all sorts of threats that are kind of interconnected. Cybersecurity, freight fraud, cargo theft, all of them, I think there are all probably some overlap in those, and we have to do better. We've been identified as an easy mark.
Yeah, as a soft underbelly, right? And a lot of that was because of this kind of lack of enforcement. And so if we can bring the kind of heat, light, and thunder that is required here, and there's actually hey, guys and gals, this is going to get prosecuted, that to me changes the game.
I think it's so important to get to these conferences and share with, maybe your competitors, maybe some people you work with, some of the stories of what's gone wrong. Because from what I understand, a lot of the cybersecurity and freight fraud stuff, no one wants to raise their hand and say, yeah, I did that. and there's been top companies in the transportation logistics space who have been hacked. And I was at the cybersecurity conference, and there was a session where they said no media, which I didn't realize as media till that day. I wasn't allowed in the session.
Yeah.
So they didn't want anybody, reporting, hey, the following companies. But as people are going into that, I was like, I know you got hacked. I know what happened to you. We've talked about it. And some have been very open about it. And I think if you're a publicly traded company, you have to make it public that you were hacked.
Yeah, if it's material, for sure.
The smaller companies fly under the radar, but I think that is a bad thing because it gives us all it means you don't share with your neighbors, right?
Well, and
And
it skews the data. So the good folks from CargoNet, they rely on data that is provided to them. And it's not everybody wants to provide that data, to your point, because they don't want to be the poster child. And so they collect as much as they can, but they have to extrapolate. So the amount that they collected in terms of losses from last year was something like 150 million, but it's really 3x of that at least, right? So the estimate's probably more like 450 million.
yeah, this is it's kind of a personal note, but my mom is a member of the garden club. And so she went to the garden club and she said at the end of one of their meetings this last year, one of the ladies from the club, and my mom says, this lady is very sharp, very successful. She got up, and she's an older lady. They're mostly older. And she got up and said, I want to tell you all, this is nothing, not gardening related. And she told about how she was swindled out of some money and how it happened. And my mom said, the lady said, I'm so embarrassed. I did not want to come here today, but the idea that I don't say something and it happens to others was,
God bless her.
and my mom was like, that was really brave. Because you've totally, especially as you get older, you're like, it almost feels cliche to get swindled out of a whole big chunk of change. And I was thinking that we're all in that same place where the last thing you want to do is say, hey, in addition to us saving a little bit of money on this, we also got your stuff stolen, right? It's like the worst conversation to have with your customers.
I know. Well, exactly right, because then you don't want to lose customers over it. And we're right now with the freight marketplace being as it is, that's a genuine concern for many of the 3PLs of the carriers, et cetera.
We don't. There's all sorts of people working on tech, and we're going to talk about AI next. And I think that we really need tech that is connecting the dots on this stuff, and we need those solutions. Anyway, let's talk about AI. So I know AI is going to be a big topic out at IANA Expo 2025. Talk about that.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, the TIA perspective, I feel like they were talking about AI right from the time we got conferences back again, right? So we had a blip because of the pandemic and we couldn't meet. But when we started coming back, the Technovations was really talking about AI. And the best way I heard it described is by Ryan Schreiber, who's so smart on this stuff. But he said, AI is just automation. I know we think about it in scary ways where it's like, oh, it's robots, like you were talking about, the humanoid robots who are going to start, making our dinner and feeding our dog. But really, at its basis, it's automation of tasks using machine learning. So a machine learns from what has happened before it. And so we're going to talk about that in the intermodal context. One of the things that I think is so interesting is going back slightly to cargo theft. We have a member company that is using AI to essentially do a census view of everything, every container in their intermodal yard. And they're using AI and drones. And so what they're learning is, okay, this would probably take a human. I don't know how long, but in the past, they typically would have a human base the assessment of how many containers in the yard and what those containers are based on visual cues and then the consists coming in. Well, it turned out that the AI and drone combo was so much more accurate than the human and consist combo. So there's a genuine example. So not only for benefit to your customer in terms of efficiencies and everything else, but also knowing what you have and where it needs to be placed and all that. So look, I don't want to obviate humans from anything, but if that's a task that is better served by using some form of automation, then by all means, we should absolutely embrace that. And I think that to me is kind of the excitement, the part of the conversation is how can intermodal, when you think about it as being a 250-year-old operation, at least as it relates to the railroads, how can we sort of absorb and learn from this so that we can continue to advance ourselves?
Yep. And by the way, you mentioned Ryan Schreiber. He's been talking about AI for a long time. By the way, I am part of I'm showing my Whoop here. I wear a Whoop. Ryan Schreiber has the Freight Whoop. So anybody who wears a Whoop, please join the Freight Whoop with Ryan and I and 20 some other people. I get criticized because my strain levels are always really high. Someone's like, Joe wins strain. And I was like, because I'm older than all you guys. That's why I win. because wandering around doing my life is like I ran a marathon compared to you.
Ah, that's
But
so funny.
anyway, it is a very cool tool, and I think this is the future of these whoops.
Okay. I don't have a Whoop. I'll think about it.
Yeah, they're very, very cool. So it basically just monitors your recovery, your sleep, and your strain, and it also gives you your biological age versus your chronological age. So very cool.
I'm 32.
So it says I'm 7 years younger than my real life. So I was like,
Oh,
I
that's
hope it's,
great.
I hope that's true. I
That's a
hope it's
win.
true.
Yeah.
That's not working on the gray hair. My hair won't listen,
You
but
still got a
whatever.
head of hair there, Joe. That's
There
all.
you go. There you go. So it's interesting with the AI. I think every cool drone we see, those are using AI. So I don't know if you watched the drones for the unfortunate war we have going on in Europe. When they started the war, you saw a lot of drones were kind of remote controlled from somewhere. So someone was steering it, and it had to have the visuals to get back to them. Now they're basically programmed. I don't know if program's even the right word. They're using AI in those to say, find this tank, find this target. And I just talked last week to Parker Conroy about humanoid robots, and he said robots are getting all the programming they're doing with these humanoid robots is all advanced very rapidly because of AI. Because in the past, you would have had to program that robot to do stuff. Now they're more or less learning using generative AI. So I think one way to look at this is there's two pieces to this factory. One is the robot factory, and the other is the AI factory that's going to inform the way it works. But I think also when we think about intermodal, when I think about intermodal, I think of attached Excel spreadsheets, attached
Oh gosh, I
PDFs,
know,
all
right?
that unstructured stuff. Um, I call it static, but it's not usable because it's just attached to an email. AI is now able to take that stuff out of those documents and put it into fields. Which, as soon as you get into fields, now you can start to have some insights on it.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. No more paper. Although I still write things down, Joe. I'm sorry to say.
Yes, same here. I was at Manifest a few years ago and talking to a vice president of a very large transportation company, and they said, "Oh, I think we're behind in AI," and I was like, I think what I said then, I said, I think we're kind of still in this phase of AI readiness, which is cleaning up our data so we can actually do something with it. And I think there's some companies that are now using AI to clean up the data so it can start to be used again to inform future decisions. It's fascinating, and I think it's a strange new world. I know already we're hearing there's some clerk work that's going away because of AI, and I'll be curious to see what happens in a year or two.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this is I'm an unnatural but kind of natural segue to one of the other things that we do at our conferences. You think about our generation, or I don't know what generation you are. I'm Gen X. Gen X is maybe a little less
I'm the last of the boomers.
Okay, there you go. Baby boomer, I'm Gen X. We're perhaps not as comfortable with AI as say the millennials are than Gen Alpha. And so one of the things that we do is we have kids from various supply chain schools at American universities come and compete about a logistics / intermodal issue to kind of challenge them, but also to provide what are their insights. So it could be about AI, it could be about something else. But the point is they have a comfort level about that stuff. And so we can actually learn from them in some regards, right? They make a presentation, they have judging, and ultimately, one school becomes the winner. But one of the reasons we do that is because every generation has to have one to replace it. And so we want to make sure that the industry stays vital and grows and adapts and doesn't stay rooted in the past. And having those kids in the supply chain schools is a way to do it.
Yeah, one of my daughters was doing an internship at a big automotive company, and she was roommates with another girl who worked in engineering at the same big automotive company. And they asked this girl in engineering, come in and do this work. And within a week, she said, I don't know why you have a person doing this. This should be a program. And she wrote the program and and then sold it to the company. And I was thinking that kind of is going to happen more and more, because I think the younger generations, are showing up. I always say they use consumer grade technology. They expect things to be already in a software. And if you say, "Oh yeah, this is real simple. All you got to do is take it out of this this file and put it into this file," they're going to go, "Oh well, hey, I should do that," right? Or there's a program for that. And I think some of the stuff, to your point, will be bottom up, which is good. We need that. So we talked about the conference, and we've talked about cargo theft, and again, your efforts over there at IANA, representing our whole industry with our elected officials there in Washington. Mergers and acquisitions going to be a topic out there. So why is that a topic on the agenda?
Well, yeah. It's not going to just be about the big headline news ones, but there is a big headline news one going on in the industry. So 2 railroads have announced that they will file an application to have a merger approved, Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern. And so that's certainly a huge note to anyone who follows the railroad space, but anyone who follows the merger space too, because then you have people on the sidelines eating their popcorn, like what's going to happen in this administration? Is there going to be a permissiveness to it there that's such an enormous, the first transcontinental merger gets approved. And then you have 2 other railroads, well, I guess if you want to talk about 4 other railroads who are sitting on the sidelines and not necessarily, we don't yet know what they're planning to do. So it's really an enormous topic of conversation. One of the best things about the whole discussion, though, is that both the folks who are interested in merging and the folks who are not interested yet in merging are talking about how growth is so vital to the railroad industry, and that intermodal is a cornerstone of that growth. And so selfishly, from the intermodal industry, having these high-powered folk talk about the importance of intermodal and how they're leaning into that can only benefit us. And so it'll be interesting to see. The filing is not for some time, probably this winter, to see what ends up happening. And so, how much can we get into it? I don't know, but I think it'll be certainly a topic of conversation.
Yep. I think also one of the things I always reminded when we talk about railroads, they build their own infrastructure. Those tracks are all theirs. And every time we talk about a big infrastructure project, there are just some ridiculous overspending, over budget, never delivering projects that we, sometimes they're massive. And by the way, we do have some successful ones. We have some nice ports that get built, and I think we're going to have even more. But with the railroads, they just predictably build their own railroad tracks, and they take care of themselves. It's a enormous resource for the country.
Yeah, you're right. They say we build so you don't have to. I mean, basically is what their approach is. But I think every mode has to be concerned, and wanted just to be somewhat back to DC for a second. Anything that gets built, even if it's a railroad project, which that's on their right of way, has to go through an environmental review. And as we know, there are so many things that can go wrong with the approval process of getting anything permitted or anything constructed. And so, one of the things that ties us together from every single mode that we represent is how can we get projects delivered faster, and how can we get permitting done so that it's not just, Joe NIMBY, not you, Joe NIMBY down the street says, I'm going to tie myself to the truck, or I'm going to tie myself to the boat, or I'm going to tie myself to the train. It'll never get built.
I live in Michigan and in the Detroit metro area, but one of the outer counties, and it's the fastest growing county over the last 30 years. And what's crazy is when you move into the neighborhood and they say, oh, they're thinking about putting up another subdivision down the street. everybody in the subdivision says, that's outrageous. I was like, well, we all just moved here. And it's always like, no, I'm the last one here. We do not want to ruin this pristine area. We have this parks and we have the woods. It's rural. We're not having any more. And I was like, yep, everybody in is the last person in their own mind. And
That's right. That's right. Look, I like greens and I like trees and all that stuff, but we also have to have balance. I think how we deliver things in this country. We certainly don't want to stay mired in the past and never actually, develop or expand.
yeah, it's a funny thing because there was a farmer and all the subdivisions were built around his farm. And every once in a while I drive by, wave. And then I remember somebody said, he's getting old. He wants to sell all that. I don't know when he's growing corn or something. and somebody said, they can't let that get developed. And I was thinking, that poor farmer, he was the only one who's been there farming for all these years. And then at some point when he's 80 years old and says, all right, time to sell. Well, you can sell it, but no one can build anything there. So you're not going to sell it for much. You're like, sorry, dude. Anyway, get way off track. Anyway, yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what can happen with the railroads, because we are starting to look at railroads a lot more, I think, because they are environmentally green. And I think also, if you're ever driving along on the expressway and you see dozens and dozens of trucks, you go, God, it'd be nice if they had their own road. That's what I always used to think. They do. It's the railroad. They can haul 300 cars and it's cleaner and greener, and it clears up our expressways. And
Yeah, I mean, what I think I said at the outset that the highest best use of the mode is sort of what intermodal appreciates. So you think about, where does it make sense to have trucking? Well, obviously in these kind of last mile, right? That makes the most sense. And also these middle distances, call it 0 to 500 miles. That makes all the sense in the world. I think railroads
yes,
likely more
high volume
efficient
and long distance.
for the longer distances. And so that's exactly right. I don't want to oppose my good friends at the ATA or the owner operators. We want to work together and just say, here's where it makes the most sense. And I certainly wouldn't wade into the argument about whether or not there's a driver shortage, but one can observe that there are probably fewer truck drivers who want to drive 1,000 miles than there used to be, right? Because this newer generation wants to see their families and be home and all of that stuff. So let the railroads do it.
Exactly. So I just interviewed Spencer Tenney the other day.
He will be there. He's moderating and presenting at a panel.
Yeah, so Spencer Tenney is a mergers and acquisition guy. So we had that conversation. I don't think I published that. Probably publish it later this week or next week. But anyway, mergers and acquisition, we just talked about this thing with the railroad, but it's been growing, and I think we started to see some stuff happen in recent years. So under the Biden administration, there was, it wasn't as permissive as you said with the mergers and acquisitions, and I think they would wade in for reasons like one of them was, hey, because that would hurt the union, which is usually not what you're concerned about. Usually, you're concerned about the consumers. But anyway. Talk about some other speakers. I know Spencer's going to be there talking about mergers and acquisitions. Who are some other speakers who are going to be at the conference?
Well, one of the wonderful things about working in the DC area is that there are a lot of different associations who also work here. And so we're going to have an associations panel moderated by Matthew Leffler. Do you know Matthew?
Yeah. I just talked to him.
He's a Chicago guy. Yeah,
he's supposed to come on the podcast. Soon.
Yeah, he's terrific. And so we'll have the Association of American Railroads, the Association of American Port Authorities. We'll have the, hold on, I'm missing one, and they're going to be so mad at me that I forgot. No, who is it? It's someone else important. Gosh darn it. I'm going to remember, Joe. I'm so sorry. Whoever it is, I love you and appreciate you for all that you do.
Welcome to my world, Anne. I always remember after the interview.
Oh my God. Who is it? Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of lot of the people from the associations. Who else is speaking?
And so the point of that, a U.S. Chamber. How could I forget? The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the most important business interest in America. So the point of that is that we are not here alone. We should collaborate with each other. And there's a lot of things that we can work together on. And so that's the point of having the association panel. And so who else? We have a number of sessions about really how to deal with turbulent times that we're in, right? We have how to attract and retain top intermodal talent, obviously something of huge interest. We are closing with a speaker, really a story of redemption from prison to public service, which is fascinating and I think inspiring to the audience. So we're really excited about that. A guy named Royal Ramey. And we're excited about him.
Yeah, I think it's so that I mean, an important topic. I think 1% of the U.S. population is incarcerated, and not all of them are going to get out, but most of them are in there for nonviolent crimes. We have to somehow redeem those people and help them have productive lives. It's for the benefit of all of us. But
not to make it worse.
Yeah, and I think this whole industry needs a little bit of a facelift. And the reason I say it that way is we have to attract, to your point, the best and the brightest. And I don't think people look at intermodal and, supply chain kind of got a lot of publicity during COVID, but no one was particularly talking about intermodal. And I think is because if you kind of look, you go, oh, a shipping container, nothing changes in that. As a shipping container hasn't changed in 50 years. But I think we're starting to see those shipping containers start to be smart containers. And I think we're going to start to say also more of the goods and certain goods that we build are going to be built here, or maybe not necessarily in China. So we're moving supply chains around. And I think it's a great time to get into this business. And I think we have to start looking at this as a high-tech business. And I think when you say railroad and intermodal, it almost like the good old days, like the 1850s. No, this is a modern way to manage supply chains. And again, nobody does it better than this country on supply chain efficiency. But I still think we need to glow up.
Well, no, and so I'm glad you're saying that, Joe, because our board is also really focused on educating through public relations, through a PR campaign. And so what are those messages that could resonate, that could say, look, this is not, just because it's an old industry doesn't mean it's a stagnant industry. And I think that that's a critical point to make. And we're trying to provide a truck-like product at a competitive rate, and ultimately competitive rate that's sustainable, et cetera. And so that's a message that should resonate. One of the things that we combat sometimes is if someone has a negative experience with a carrier, they say, okay, I'll just use a different carrier next time. But if someone has a negative experience with an intermodal move, they'll say, I'm never using intermodal again. And so how can we combat that, right? And I think that that's kind of an important part of our marching orders.
And it's a funny thing. We've seen all sorts of industries kind of transformed by technology. So we saw, Lyft and Uber kind of replace taxis in a lot of places. Well, taxis never felt high tech to us. It never felt like a great experience. Nobody said, hey, well, how was your cab ride? And just having an app and a way to vet, I'm not going to minimize what they've done, doesn't seem super difficult, but the experience that we have with Lyft or Uber generally feels better than what we had with taxis. I'm sure the taxi business is upgrading. And I think of the same thing happening with the trucking business. We started using what I call consumer grade technology, where nobody's asking you to hit F8 and go to the cost screen, right? So I think the same thing needs to happen in the intermodal business. And I think that means fresh blood, fresh ideas.
I agree with you. And I think again, going back to, if there's this focus on growth, that to me comes out of it, is an organic byproduct of growth, which is how can we get the customer to be with us?
Yes, I love it. So, Anne, I'm going to summarize what we talked about the best I can. Then I want to get your final thoughts on the topic. So, I'm talking to my friend Anne Reinke, and we're talking about Intermodal Expo 2025, Unpacking Cargo Theft, AI, and mergers and acquisitions. And we're also talking about the IANA conference, which starts in 13 days, which will be September 15th through the 17th out in Long Beach. So, the people who should consider getting out to that conference and joining IANA they might be in the marine business, they might be in the rail business, 3PLs, vendors, if you support the industry with shipping containers, or, by the way, there could be companies who want to get involved and say, I want to make shipping containers. How do I get in that business? But I think we're also going to see a whole bunch of vendors there who are selling the technology that makes that shipping container smarter. And so we can solve some of the problems we talked about today. And then there's going to be a big educational element to this, with including the college students who will be doing some case studies out there. So we talked about cargo theft. Cargo theft is still a huge problem, not just for the for the trucking business, but also for the rail business. Huge emphasis on that at the conference. We all have to figure this out. It's a horrible cost, and it's something we have to solve. And I think you guys are advocating for us at Congress, asking them to have stronger enforcement, solve some of these problems with laws. But I think ultimately we're also going to have to help ourselves with new technology that makes it really difficult to steal from us as much as they steal from us right now. We talked about AI, of course. AI is important, and I think as much as anything, we're all trying to educate ourselves and say, where can we start applying this? I think everybody's afraid they're going to be left behind when it comes to AI. So get out there to IANA and speak to the experts and figure out how you can stay current. We talked about mergers and acquisitions, super important. It's having on in the rail business, but I think you're starting to see it across the whole industry. I mentioned Descartes. They just bought My Carrier Portal, which is a vetting tool. We just saw DAT buy the Convoy platform. In fact, I interviewed Bill Driegert on that. I'm going to publish that this week. And I think you're starting to see these technology companies building a suite of solutions for our industry. And I think it's getting stronger and stronger. It used to be, give me a TMS. Now it's dozens of other technologies that go along with my transportation management system. So all the new tech will be out there at IANA on display. I'm sure I missed something, but put a big old bow on this one. Final thoughts on the topic, Anne?
Sure. So how do you create an intermodal industry that you can sustain over the long term, that can grow? Really, you have to be part of that intermodal conversation. So that's why 1,200 folks from all over Canada, Mexico, and the US come out to Long Beach, because they know that they are with everyone who cares about intermodal. And so it's intermodal Christmas, intermodal speed dating, whatever you want to call it. It's an opportunity for everyone to get to know each other, to coalesce around solutions for problems that are sticky, and to sort of introduce the next generation of intermodal leaders into the space, because they're our hope and our future and all of that. Without that networking opportunity, such an opportunity for intermodal does not exist. So we want to make sure that we present all the education that is relevant, all the speakers that are interesting, and all the people that you care to see.
I love it. I'll make sure I put a link to your LinkedIn profile, link to your website. Any of the links you give me, I will put in the show notes. Not too late to get out to that conference, but if you can't get to the conference, you can still join IANA. And why should they join IANA?
Well, if you are interested in being protected, defended, advocated for, have networking too, and if you have any interest in the intermodal industry at all as a potential target for your future technology, for your future business growth, for your future customer opportunities, then we're the organization that you need to join.
I love it. Thank you so much for taking the time, Anne. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks, Joe. I'll see you in a couple weeks.
I will. It'll be great. Thank you so much. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward.
You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.